it's bizarre to see the mixture of people. First of all, people I'm working with right now, clients that I've worked with for years, dear friends, family. Thanks everybody for coming to support me and share this adventure with me. It's like, yes, it's done. Quite a few people here probably have written books. Raise your hand. It's just one. I mean, it's a very interesting process. And when I started it, I expected that it would be really pretty easy. Because it's what I know. So I just need to write down what I know, right? It's some patterns that I've watched and I've done over the years. So, just people said codify it. Put it down on paper and that'll be great. It's excruciating. It's wonderful that it's finished. There are terrific people here who've helped along the way, doing some artwork for the book, but also contributing to my way of thinking. So I'm happy you're here, and I just want to tell you I'm thrilled that I completed my first book. This book I look at almost like a primer. So as it goes, when you go to read it, particularly if you know me well, you'll see it's pretty elusively simple. The tenets, it's basically a series of vignettes describing the issues that are underlying, the sort of three key underlying principles that I came to realize affected all of the clients that I've worked with over the years. So, as a consultant, and I'm going to talk for a minute about that, it's sort of a funny way to consult. Several of us are here that are consultants, but I've been a boutique consultant for 40 years. And it's a really interesting experience because I got to play with big companies, little companies, individuals, groups, families, industries in ways that if I were part of a big corporation, I couldn't, and it really suited me. And we don't see until probably 10, 20 years after where I looked back and realized, so what's it telling me? I mean, I've done a pretty good job. I was able to compete with the big guys, which was interesting. Because I had so much freedom to decide who to work with, how to work with them, I could compile information and booklets and applications that were unique and customized for each client, which is what I did. So I just got to play for, say 20 odd years until at one point I was going to be teaching at the university, and a colleague of mine said, so how do you write a curriculum? How do I even prepare it? And he said, well, you have to know what is it that informs your thinking. And that was really a fascinating question, and I recommend you ask yourselves that every once in a while. So what informs my thinking? So I really looked back over the 20 years to see what are the patterns, what was working, and why was it working? I knew that I had a variety of kinds of clients, and I got the opportunity to sort of dance in their world for a while, and yet stay an advisor. And so I got curious about just asking myself, what is it? And that's when this epiphany occurred that several of you know, because I drove you crazy with it, Jay. I'm looking at you. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this throughput thing? But this was 10 years ago, and nobody even knew what the word meant. But I had this sort of awakening that said, all I'm doing is helping people remove constraints. They got something going on in their life. I got to help them figure out what that thing is, and then help them remove it, and then they move on. And when it works well, frankly, it's sort of magical because, people have said, I agree with this statement that says once you know something, it's like you can never not know it. So you look back and say, oh, I didn't realize that because it was so simple in the way that we gain new awareness. And that's what I had the pleasure of doing with so many different and varied clients, from Sun Microsystems to the National Association of Realtors to Rogers Supply Company to Frontier Airlines, I mean, big and small businesses alike. And every situation was unique, which was the most fun. It's like having a playground where I got to play. Bark doggy daycare, you know? I mean, it's really quite varied. But what happened when I looked back was that there was a core pattern. There were some things that I was believing in and anchored in that were helpful. And it was almost like you create a triangular bearing to get your position on a map. Well, I believe that that's sort of what I was anchored in too, that there is sort of, that to get our bearings, to look at, become more aware and look at reality differently, it has to do with who you are, like who you serve, why you're doing something, how you're structured to deliver it, and whether you can remove constraints to get there. And those become the themes in this book. I believe that strategy is fine, but what's more important is how well you're moving. And when I'm saying how well you're moving, toward what? So when you think of strategy, you have to say, why am I doing that? And then how is it working? So I'm going to talk a few minutes about the book, but understand that was 10 years ago. Uber had just come on the scene. I mean, nobody knew of Uber then. 2008, I think they were just invented, created. So we think about whole industries. It's a sea change of innovation now with digital transformation. Technology has transformed us from a vertical, sequential way of thinking, let A plus B equals C, to a horizontal, interconnected, and instantly enabled environment. That even when I was talking about throughput then, it was almost premature. Of course, people didn't understand what that meant. Today, you know, exponential change is what you hear everywhere. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. Small entrepreneurial upstarts can initiate and scale businesses in a matter of months. Any size business can customize and mine analytics, gaining efficiencies so that they're competing with the big guys. Much like I was doing, but one at a time. Technology now enables people to leverage, as long as they have the ideas, to leverage any business or industry. Whole industries have been disrupted, changing the ways we get around, how we fuel our lives, using money and communicate. I mean, I don't know, anybody here been to China? I mean, it's phenomenal. You know, I happen to be really into China right now, not all the political sort of controlling issues. But China, if they need to build infrastructure, they build infrastructure. You know, they don't go through because it's dictated from on high, but it's extremely clean. But in China, there's no cash. People don't walk around with cash. There are no checkbooks in China. Every transaction, no matter how big you are, how small, or what the amount is, where's my phone, is done on the phone. So if I want, I mean, I saw a clip on 60 Minutes or something, there was a person on the street, a beggar on the street, and if I wanted to give that beggar $2, I flash my camera, he gets $2. It's completely disintermediated, this banking system that we have, and there are no credit cards. So in China, they don't use credit cards, they don't use checkbooks, they don't use cash. It's pretty simple, they use their phone. Now, most of us haven't been there, I can't even imagine experiencing it. And by the way, there's some probably downsides to it. But it's very simple for a customer to think about how to do it. And one of the core tenets of this book is, frankly, it's the customer now that has control. So we have built management systems. My son is an industrial psychologist. He works on very sophisticated, large management structures that build efficiencies internally, that help manage human resources, that smooth things out. But what I believe is that that becomes secondary to the anchor that a company has to have on its customer. Any of us, if we don't like something, can tweet enough about it that it can immediately deep six a company, a doggy daycare company, right? Could happen because somebody didn't like it, so they tell 12 of their friends, and those 12 friends tell 120 more. So think about that, and I'm going to quote someone in the room, I won't tell you who it is, but that the center of gravity has shifted. That we used to believe that we have to be smart inside our companies, we have to be strategic, we have to do things right, we have to hire the right people, we have to train the right people, and all of that. And that's well and good, but to what end? Today, because the environment gives the customer so much control, Amazon has ruined us all. We expect things immediately and exactly the way we want them, by the way. So our expectations have been progressive. So the center of gravity is now on the outside of the company, not the inside. We pivot from the outside in. The supply chain mentality is now a demand chain mentality. So if we go to the traditional marketing department that analyzed customer needs and looked at psychographics and demographics and trends, that was a department, I say was, but it is in most. We have a marketing department. And we have supply chain managers. Well, ironically, those two competencies, I believe, at the heart of how organizations have to grow now. The weaving together of a customer being on the inside, not the outside. We have to own the customer, know the customer, and actually tether ourselves to the customer. We keep thinking the customer's fickle. How can we run fast enough keeping up with what our customers need? And I'm saying, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You actually should be the customer. Because if you're tethered to them, you're anchored, you actually can move in a more fluid way as an organization. And I don't care how large you are. Tattered cover, so the anchor customer to me becomes the most important factor in a company's growth. Who are they? What do they need? And how quickly and responsibly are you getting it to them? How well are you in Amazon? You know, Amazon is, it's amazing, isn't it? It's almost like an Amazon world as a metaphor. Because we just saw in that clip 10 years ago, they were just delivering books. Think about it now. I mean, I ordered, stuff for a recipe that I can't find anywhere else. I get it on Amazon the next day. So the Amazon mentality, and I'm going to read you a quote from Jeff Bezos, is exactly the way all other companies also have to be thinking. Here's what he says. It's in the book, by the way. Our number one conviction, idea, philosophy, and principle. And by the way, he can afford to. It's a tech company. It's tech that's driving it. It's just that we have to do this everywhere. Everything that drives Amazon is a customer obsession as opposed to competitor obsession. So we're always focused on the customer, working backwards from the customer's needs, developing new skills internally so that we can satisfy what we perceive to be future customer needs. We have a whole working backwards process that starts from the customer needs and works backwards. And I suggest in this book that that's what every organization has got to begin to do now. But when we use the word customer, it's really easy because most of us think in terms of stakeholders and he's my customer and she's my customer and it's a give and take. I also believe that it's much more strict than that. And that when we think about becoming alive in this world of instant responsiveness, we have to think of who is our anchor customer, meaning who's the customer that defines who we are. Not who we want it to be, but who is it that makes us who we are. Tattered cover, a friend of mine, and I haven't seen her in many years, her name is Lou Haggerty, and Lou worked at Tattered cover for, I bet you 30 plus years. I don't think she's here anymore. But Lou easily 25 years ago told me a story, maybe it was longer. And she said, and she was working at Tattered Cover, and it was in a different location. Where were they? Yes, yeah, they were in Cherry Creek. You know, that's that Tattered Cover visual that you have and the feeling that you have. Lou said, and this was at a time, you know, where things were changing. Again, it was probably 20-some years ago. But she said that she went to a national book owners conference, and she sat down and talked about what Tattered Cover does. And she said she was in a breakout room and raised her hand and shared how people would come and read books. And this was in New York. And she came back and she was shocked. People were angry, shocked, weirded out by it, and how do you make money, and don't they just come and read the book and then not buy it? There was a mentality that had nothing to do with the customer. It had to do with being efficient, being a bookstore. And I'll never forget this story, because Tattered Cover then saw its anchor customer as the person wanting to learn. It wasn't just the person buying the book. It's a little bit like Starbucks, creating the environment that makes you want to come. That's their anchor customer. So everything they did, and everything they do here, I mean, how many people are sitting around reading? That didn't exist before. Business books, I don't know if you can remember, but I do. They would say, oh, are you going to buy that, ma'am? Because I'd pick up a book. For me to sit down and read it for an hour and then decide whether I want to buy it was absolutely irrational. So we think, I mean, that's not irrational now. It still is a little bit awkward in some companies, but you know when you walk in Tattered Cover that you're the anchor customer. I had just had my floors refinished. Anybody had their wood floors refinished? Raise your hand. It is quite an experience, isn't it? Yes. You know, I vetted them, these floor cleaning places, and I hired one, and they said, that's great. And I signed on the dotted line, and I read, they gave me a schedule, and I read things, and I'm going to share some. My husband fell off a ladder and had cracked his ribs, and this is all going on, and I need to finish my floors. It was like years overdue. So I hired them, no big deal, and they said, oh, by the way, you'll need to be out of your house 5 days. I said, what? Well, yeah, because one day we do this, and the next day we do this, and the next day we do this, and the next day we do this. You know, and I said, so it was ridiculous. And then, by the way, it ended up being 7 because it was the weekend and they don't work on the weekends. And this, you know, this is a long-standing company and all of that. So I called them back and I said, excuse me, but these other floor finishing companies that I didn't sign up with, they said I could be out of my house maybe 2 days. You know, I just need to stay at a hotel one night because they have to dry, what if something has to dry or it has to cure or something. So I'm calling her and she said, that's not how we work. And I said, well, tell me how you work. She said, well, we work 3 or 4 jobs at the same time. So I'm going to come and test your stain, and then I'm going to come back and stain it the next day, but then we're going to go stain 3 other people's houses, because then we're going to come back the other day and we do 1 coat, then we come back. And the problem with having this mentality that I have and writing a book like this is I have very little tolerance for this. And by the way, I speak a different language, so I said, so I'm in my head saying, so their anchor customer, who the hell is it? Then I found out it's family owned. It's an older gentleman who's in his 80s and everybody's worried about him. He still owns it. And I realized their anchor customers are their workmen. They've built an infrastructure that services their workmen, and I'm a supplier to the system. So once I got that, it didn't make me more pissed, but I will never use them again because all I needed to know was who's the anchor customer. So think about experiences you have where everybody, they say, oh, we're here to serve you. but it's somehow not exactly what you thought. And you scratch your head wondering, am I stupid? Did I miss something? Because right now, you have control. And if something's ambiguous, it is. And if something doesn't feel right, it is. So you ask yourself, how are they set up? Who's their anchor customer? What a contrast. I'll give you an example with Uber. Brilliant, right? Moves at the speed of need. I started using Uber like probably 9 years ago when I was traveling back and forth from Texas a lot. And I loved them. And I loved them because, of course, I mean, this book I've been writing for 10 years. And somebody said, why? And I said, well, it's like an itch that won't go away. I have to scratch it. So I finally got done, but it's been a long time. But when Uber came, I thought this is the epitome of having an anchor customer, disintermediating all the activities, so we don't have a taxi to call, to come, to show up. They're incentivized to get me there fast. I don't have to pay a tip, which now you sort of do, but I didn't like what the taxis do. I give them 10% or 15%, and I'm calculating, why should I have to work so hard? So Uber comes along, and I don't have to work. And I was in heaven, because I realized that's the experience of being in something that is simple, like Amazon, right? Again, it's a tech company. Well, what Uber screwed up is that they thought their anchor customer was me, the writer. Sort of logical, right? I'm the one paying them, I'm the one needing the ride, all of that. But in anchoring their system on me, they screwed up their drivers. And if you want to look at how Lyft got invented as quickly as it did, you had disgruntled drivers. If Uber had just seen that their anchor customer was the driver, and it was their job to service us, keep those guys happy and women. But Lyft, Lyft found that little bubble in their system and built, they came in with a pretty heavy competition early. Now, are they better now? I don't know, maybe it's how it happened. But they weren't thinking in terms of the behavioral operations. Most organizations, and of course will say, okay, we all want to operate like Uber or like Amazon because we need the fluidity and we need our customers to be in love with us. Most organizations, as they scale, they have all kinds of different operating systems. We have technology operating systems, we have manufacturing, we have distribution, tons of operational systems, but what's missing and what I hope you read in this book, and I hope it doesn't look too oversimplified, because when you peel it back, it's not quite that simple. But you begin to see what the behavioral operations need to look like. If you build a behavioral operating system that anchors first on the customer, the anchor customer who defines you, and then you build a structure that enables you to deliver it really fast, like technology, but using people, you'll stay in business. But any more frustration from us, and we can do real damage to business. Bless you. Let me see if there's anything I've left out. We're in a truly new world of commerce, you all know it. Transactions are different. And no matter how we focus on internal efficiencies, we will hit a bottleneck when it comes to that customer changing, unless we're actually in bed with them. So our leaders, unfortunately now, are going headlong into new technologies, which we need. I mean, technology is the answer because it's streamlining everything. AI, all of the new, latest and greatest, many of you in the room are experts in that field. It's my premise that without the behavioral operating system to align with it, it actually becomes inefficient. And what happens is we end up saying that the people are just we don't, the departments aren't working well, the leadership isn't working well, and it's not flowing. So it's this behavioral operating system that I believe is really critical today. I don't want to talk very long, so I'm going to be done in a minute. So here's what I've learned. At the heart of every great organization is sort of the synchronicity between the customer and the internal operations and the ability to move quickly. So it involves technology also. The customer defines the organization's identity, the anchor. The structure institutionalizes behavior. So what you'll read about in the book is a way to build departments that are not static, but they're dynamic, because they all operate in service to other departments. So it's internal service, we could say, but it's not customer-centric. The buzzwords now are customer-centric, and think of lean. If any of you use lean technologies, they're brilliant. What's called the ranked advantage, the RAD service structure is that I've built, is a construct for it. It's how do you build the box or the construct that enables things to work well. My hope in writing this book is to enable organizations and organizational systems to see themselves differently. And this sounds pretty logical and simple right now, but when you actually apply it to your own organizations or others, it can be pretty complex. But it is simple. There are simple answers in it that we've overcomplicated. I want organizations to look at themselves differently, sort of as a new entity, born out of the reflection of their customer, with the simple realization that the customer is them, and where value creation is the only thing that exists. How do I create value for my own department? How do I create value? And being accountable to them. The supply chain and the demand chain have to be existing in every company. And I'd like to begin that discussion with companies today that don't know what's going wrong. So, the RAD environment is a ranked advantage design structure. The anchor customer is a key tenet of this book, and the concept of throughput. And I believe it's a book for this time, an era. And I'd love to take questions, and thank you all for your patience.